Rain dance, rain dance. My goodness. Okay, so...
Marjorie
Am I
Taylor
dying?
Greene is the biggest problem facing our country, but has also decided to introduce what is called the quote-unquote Protect Children's Innocence Act. So, as you
What?
could expect, it's just advocacy for child abuse from Marjorie Taylor Greene. Classic, really. She's a big fan of child abuse. She advocates for it on the regular, and now we got a bill that's been put forward that's going to do that, which is neat.
Can you
so
read
thank
the
God
bill?
for that. Essentially, this bill is meant to amend Chapter 110 of Title 18 of United States Code to prohibit gender-affirming care on minors and for other purposes.
gonna read
And this
more about
essentially
this.
would
This is
make
ridiculous.
following the medical and scientific consensus and standards of care as it pertains to trans people, trans youth included, it would make that, I believe, a Class C felony to follow those standards
It's a
of care,
felony
which is,
to
I don't know
provide
exactly like what
healthcare
else
to
you
people?
do, what else you could say about this. It's literally just a mandate to make it so that trans people can't exist. And of course, we've got such classic lovers of children, Matt Gaetz, co-sponsoring this bill.
who?
Thank God for that. The guy under federal litigation for alleged trafficking of a minor. Pretty cool. Whoa! I ended the segment a little bit ago, but look at this shit. Wow, would you look at that? Matt Gaetz' ex-girlfriend testifies to grand jury in sex trafficking probe. The development suggests the Department of Justice may be moving closer to indicting the Florida Republican.
What
Matt
do you
Gaetz'
know?
ex-girlfriend testified Wednesday before a federal grand jury investigating him for sex crimes, a major development that suggests the Department of Justice may be moving closer to indicting him. The ex-girlfriend, whose name is being withheld by NBC News to respect her privacy, has been in talks for months with prosecutors about an immunity deal. Under a possible deal, she would avoid prosecution for obstruction of
Republicans
justice in return for
doing
testifying
actual
in the
crimes,
investigation of whether
actual
Gaetz in
child
2017 had
abuse
sex with a 17-year-old female for money.
by
Whether months
accusing
later he and others
everyone
violated
else
federal law prohibiting people from
of the
transporting
same.
others across state lines to engage in prostitution.
It's
Legal
not
sources familiar with the case say Gaetz is
that
being investigated for 3
surprising.
distinct crimes: sex trafficking, 17-year-old, and violating the Mann Act, which prohibits taking women across state lines for prostitution, and obstructing justice. Well, that doesn't seem too good.
Indeed.
So she went on Tucker Carlson to talk about this new bill. So
Okay.
let's see what's up here. I haven't seen this yet.
So
I
why
have
is
not
the
seen
sexual
this
mutilation
either.
of children, the sterilization of children, legal? No one in the Congress seems to be asking that. No one did until Marjorie Taylor.
Yeah, because nobody in Congress, until now, I guess, is fucking stupid enough to believe that that's actually happening. Because
Who
it's
would
not.
frame it as
Study after study
sterilization
shows
of
that
children?
the standards of care as it pertains to the treatment of gender
would
dysphoria and other
frame
related
it
trans
like
health care, even in youth, is massively effective. The regret rate for these are minuscule to the point of being statistically insignificant, and it renders all manner of benefits for the patients involved as well, which is too much for Republicans, for right-wingers,
handle.
for conservatives, because they hate you and want you to suffer.
Green decided this is worth legislating. She represents Georgia in the U.S. Congress. She joins us with an announcement about new legislation pending. Congresswoman, thanks so much for coming on.
Marjorie Taylor
so what do you plan
Greene,
to do about
she's
this?
one insane person.
Well, I find this absolutely appalling, Tucker. And you know, the whole reason why I ran for Congress in the first place
'Cause you're
is because I'm
insane.
one of the Americans that are sick and tired of our government allowing the abuse of the American people. But when it comes
I
to
see.
gender affirming care,
Which, by the way, we're beating a dead horse at this point, but she's literally done nothing to actually help any average Americans within her tenure in the House of Representatives.
Well,
in
what
fact,
a
she's voted
surprise.
against all manner of bills, with the end result being that more and more Americans suffer. Classic, really. It's a Republican. Shocking.
but when
Yeah,
it
very
comes to
shocking.
gender affirming care, which is really child abuse,
So, to say that gender-affirming care is so-called child abuse is literally just projection. in this
Abuse is
context.
when
We've
you
talked
help
about this on the
people.
channel before. The standards of care, the medical and scientific consensus about
This is so
the treatment of
ridiculous.
gender dysphoria and other related trans healthcare
So
topics,
stupid.
even in youth, is that medical transition, hormones, puberty blockers, eventually any kind of surgeries or other procedures
Right.
end up being beneficial to the patients and
Well, yeah,
decreases
that's
rates of
care.
depression,
That's what it's
decreases
so-called
rates of suicidality.
That's why we call it
So to say that it's so-called
healthcare.
child abuse to allow for that, the medical consensus, is just projection, because what this bill would actually do by essentially allowing trans people to exist a Class C felony would detransition every single person who's going to be affected by this bill and was already
also-
getting gender affirming care, which if this is happening to a child, then becomes child abuse because it contradicts the consensus in the medical community and also contradicts the positive results that this care renders to the patients involved.
It's not
but
caring.
that's what they have to do.
It's
also
simply not caring about what people want, what children want, what anyone wants. It's just caring about what the conservatives want. And what they want is, as Conure has rightly said, is for people to just suffer. I cannot think of anything else. Well, they want two things. They want the people to suffer, and they want to use this as a tool to gain more power and more control. Scapegoat, push people to think that this is a problem, that this is a danger, create solutions, quote unquote, that would hurt others, and give them more power. These are the goals, basically. This is
also
the
why Tucker Carlson starts the
agenda.
segment saying that, oh my god, the mutilation of children, blah, 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 blah. No children are getting gender confirmation surgeries. This is not happening.
Yeah.
It is a boogeyman lie that they prop up to scare people. Because
And this lie is being propagated all over the world, in Poland as well, on the regular, the surgery. And Poland is even worse. In Poland, the whole transition is being reduced to a single surgery, the so-called sex change surgery. So I guess in Poland, the ignorance on the subject is even worse, on top of the bigotry.
in the
Well, let's
mind of a
listen some more.
stupid-ass conservative, the idea is, oh, a child says, oh, I'm a boy, but I think I might actually be a girl. What they think happens then is that the parent immediately takes them to a doctor. The doctor, within
surgeon.
5 minutes, cuts the fucking child's genitals off, and then they
True.
get sent on their way. This doesn't happen. It literally has never happened. It does not
will
happen like
never
this.
happen.
The way it usually is
It will
that
not
the
happen
child
like
would be
this.
like, yo, I was born a boy, but I think I might be a girl. Usually what'll happen, especially if it's a Republican and conservative parent, is that that parent will abuse their child
Yes.
emotionally, physically, or even kick them out of the house. But if
them-
they're not abusive pieces of
They will
shit
take
like
them
a
to a
lot of
doctor.
conservative parents are, then they will take the child to medical and mental health professionals.
Yep.
The child will be analyzed, looked at for a period of usually years to see
You will
if
have
that gender
meetings, you
nonconforming
will have
behavior,
tests.
these kinds of, questioning of
You
their
will
gender
have an
persists over
assessment,
time.
psychological
Eventually, if
and
it turns out that they are
psychiatrical.
actually trans, then they get on hormone therapy and they
You
go from
will
there. If not,
have-
they're taken off the puberty blocker. They
You
go
also
through
need
puberty
your
that's either
hormones
around the time that they
tested,
would have
the
anyway,
levels of your
or is a little bit
hormones.
later than they would have anyway,
body
which
needs
renders
checking.
virtually zero negative consequence. And then after that, time goes on. Eventually, those patients might be interested in getting any kind of cosmetic
Surgery.
or other
Yeah.
surgeries as it pertains to gender affirming care. And then you go from there. That's literally the actual reality. That's factual information. If you actually want to live in the reality that we do and engage with it, and you
They-
aren't scared of it like Marjorie Taylor Greene talks
They're not interested in living in reality because reality would not give them what they want. And what they want is to, step one, get a scapegoat and blame the scapegoat for everything that is wrong, for everything that is not okay in society. Step two, find a quote unquote solution to the problem. Step three, a profit, I guess. I don't know. This is ridiculous, but it's a standard modus operandi for conservatives anywhere. In Poland, in the US, I suspect in Hungary, anywhere. Okay?
Carlson are, that's actually what is happening. That's actually how that works. But of course, these people don't like the reality we live in because it scares them, it makes them uncomfortable, and because they're little bitch baby snowflakes, they have to try to force their
They are.
delusions onto everybody else through this kind of anti-trans propaganda.
Yep.
It's really sad to see.
That is what happens.
This is actually an assault and it's child abuse. And this practice should never happen. It's so disgusting and appalling, and it's an embarrassment to our country. You see, I'm one of those that believes the Republican Party is only worth being a true party, worth deserving of the people's votes, if we are willing to stand up and stop horrific things like child abuse and like so-called gender-affirming care.
So if right-wingers were worried about stopping child abuse, they would look into the Catholic Church. You would want to look into the rates of child marriage in red states and the fact that child marriage laws are still allowed in a variety of red states. The states with the most child marriage are all Republican-run. You would want to look into the rates of child abuse.
They don't
in
care
areas
about
where,
child abuse.
Abstinence-only sex
They
ed is
want
taught
to
and all these
abuse
kinds of things.
children,
The
of
fact that
course.
Republicans are in favor of that.
Because they don't treat children like people. Let's not forget. They treat children as property. They treat women as property and breeding machines. They don't care. They have something totally different on the agenda for every single one of us. And it's pretty obvious and it's transparent.
That as well. You would want to look into the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which would make it so
Yeah.
that story in Ohio of that 10-year-old who was a victim of rape ended up almost
Child.
having to be forced to carry their rapist
That
baby
is
to term at
child
fucking
abuse.
10 years old. No 10-year-old is prepared to deal with the physical trauma of that, much less the emotional. Had to go to Indiana to get that abortion. You have to look at that as well. The people that are very excited to vote for people like Roy Moore, who has been literally barred from going to certain malls because he would be harassing sexually and otherwise the girls there, the minors there. You would want to actually investigate that. You would want to
Wow.
look into your friend Matt Gaetz, who is literally currently being federally investigated for the trafficking of a minor, allegedly.
Right.
You would want to look into that. But because Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't give a shit about any of that, and she only cares about winning elections, getting power, and she wants to actively create conditions where trans people...
Exactly. That's what it's all about, always. Winning elections, getting power, and finding a group to persecute and ridicule. This is always what it's about. And this is why we, as the said group, must consolidate among each other. And I think the solidarity must happen across borders, not just in one country. We must communicate across borders and push back against this. It's
people suffer,
necessary.
and not just trans people, black and brown people broadly, poor
Yep.
people, because she hates you. That's literally it. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know.
That's
the Republican
right. You and
Party
I.
hates you. Even if you're a Republican Party voter, I would say they hate you more if you're a Republican Party voter, because
They hate you no matter who you are. And the right-wingers, they do consolidate across borders. Right-wingers in Poland, like, fall in line with the right wing in the US. Absolutely. They repeat the same talking points. They do the same strategies. So they cooperate across borders, even though they're also nationalists, which is really strange, but they do. They do fall in line internationally. So we should also push back against this on an international level. If we want to win, that is. Otherwise,
they don't do anything for you. Unless you're, like, making $500,000 a fucking year,
And
the
they
only
do
thing they're doing
something
is cutting
for you.
taxes for the
They
mega
make you
wealthy,
suffer.
deregulating corporations,
away
and then
your
literally
rights.
trying to
They
mandate
do
child
that
abuse
for
at the
you.
state level like Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing right now. Like, they're not doing anything for you. They've got nothing.
Which is really genital mutilation. It's puberty blockers that
It's interesting as well, the idea of, genital mutilation. So, of course, right-wingers will always talk about how, in some Muslim countries, they do female genital mutilation, and that's so
Yeah.
bad. But they won't say a goddamn thing about circumcision. There was an interesting Ben Shapiro tweet recently here about this. I didn't expect this to come up. So the reason why they bring up female genital mutilation and not male genital mutilation, aka circumcision, is that they want to shit on Muslims. They want to shit on Islam. They want to shit on brown people. That's literally it. They don't bring up circumcision because it's a lot of white people engaging in that, and also there's religious context for it as well. So Andrew Sullivan on Twitter says, I wonder how many people who oppose child sex changes also oppose circumcision. Similar principle to the bodily integrity of children, especially their sex organs. So Ben Shapiro quotes and asks, so your suggestion is that the removal of the foreskin is equivalent to the removal of the penis and testicles, formation of a false body cavity, and a hormonal replacement with opposite sex hormones. This is perhaps the stupidest thing I have ever heard. So I said, of course, in my infinite wisdom, because I'm always right, the difference being for those who aren't clinically brain dead like Ben Shapiro is that circumcision is done literally all the time to children, whereas bottom surgery never is, meaning that chopping off of a child's genitalia for the purposes of gender confirmation is literally never happened. It does not happen. It is a false story brought up by people that want to essentially eliminate trans people from existence. I followed up with only a fundamentally stupid person, like Ben Shapiro, would think the comparison is between the severity of the individual procedures. For youth to be prescribed puberty blockers or HRT requires medical analysis and consent to the patient, whereas circumcision is most commonly done to literal infants. So unless Ben Shapiro and Marjorie Taylor Greene think that literal infants can consent to that kind of a thing, and I mean, if you talk to her friend Matt Gaetz about if, you know, an infant could consent to that,
they don't care about consent because, repeat after me, conservatives consider children to be property. Okay? And this is also partially why they hate the idea of children and minors transitioning, puberty blocking, or anything else, because conservatives consider that a transgression on their property. This is why they get outraged by minors getting access to any form of care without their consent.
Thing might get some
Because
weird
they're seen
replies
as
there. That's
transgression
also
on their
genital
property.
mutilation. And it happens all the time. And there's no benefit for it either. There's literally no benefit for circumcision. The most commonly thing that will be brought up is, oh, hygiene. Literally just teach your child how to wash themselves. You're golden. That's it. You don't got to worry about it. So it's curious that they never bring that up. So then we talk about puberty blockers. These people don't even know what puberty blockers is. They don't know how that works. They will never bring up the fact that cis kids are put on puberty blockers for the treatment of precocious puberty, meaning that if they're going through a puberty too early to the point where it would be detrimental to their health, they get put on puberty blockers, then they get taken off them after a certain point, and then they go through puberty at a time that is not going to be detrimental to
Also, repeat after me, they care about control.
their health, and that's that. It works the same way with the prescription of puberty blockers for children who have questions about their gender identity and are still trying to figure that out with the aid of medical and mental health.
Okay, one other thing I must add because it needs saying to conservatives once again, children are property. So children do not need any identity outside of the one that the owner assigns to them. Thank you very much. That is the ideology. That is their mindset. Absolutely it is. You can see it time and time again. It's about control. It's about ownership.
Professionals, their parents, and themselves.
You can see it.
Chemical castration. Teenage girls.
So puberty blockers causing chemical castration. This is also another myth. This is also a thing that people are always bringing up on the right that isn't actually true. If that was the case, then so many cis kids who get put on those puberty blockers would be also chemically castrated. That isn't the case. That hasn't happened. So that's literally just a lie.
Actually having their breasts chopped off. Teenage boys being castrated.
So this is not happening either.
This is not happening to minors. But a person deciding to have their breasts removed is not chopping their breasts off. Healthy cis women decide to get their breasts removed, for example, when they are in high risk of breast cancer. This is a normal surgical procedure that happens not just to trans people, but also to cis people. So framing it as chopping the breasts off is just supposed to shock people and nothing else.
It might be some instances of people who are in many
Shopping
views
for
too young
breasts,
to be able to having these kinds of things
ridiculous.
happen, but it's not really happening.
It's
At any rate, that
ridiculous.
really matters. The amount of desistance when it comes to trans people is incredibly low. The amount of regret for those kinds of procedures is also incredibly low,
Idiotic.
especially when you compare it to the rates of regret for other procedures as it pertains
Yep.
to things like that. So also literally just lies. So we're basing our
Ridiculous.
pro-child abuse bill on literal lies.
It needs to be illegal, and I'm introducing a bill called Protect Children's
'Cause
Innocence
it's-
Act, and it would
It's
create
not about protecting anyone. It's not about caring for anyone. It's about speaking to your base, your bigoted base, and getting more power. Simple as the Brits would say. Simple as. There's nothing more to it.
a law that would cause it to
Nothing
be
more.
a Class C felony for any person involved in so-called gender-affirming care. That means genital mutilation surgery. That means hormones.
So the question would be, does this bill also outlaw circumcision? Probably not, because that is the most common genital mutilation that happens to children. I'm willing to bet that there is going to be a carve-out for that, an exemption for
course.
that one.
That means puberty blockers, anything involving
definitely
any
guessed
youth
right.
under the age of 18, because these kids are too young to make these awful decisions that will affect them and will be permanent.
Awful decisions. Interesting wording, right? Awful decisions. So who are you to judge what decision is quote-unquote awful? This is a bit of a mask-off moment, isn't it? Awful decisions. Well, because you say it is awful, then it must be awful, right? Ridiculous.
The rest of their lives.
Yeah, so Marjorie Taylor Greene and other right-wingers and Republicans will be like, oh my god, kids are too young to make this kind of decision. Kids are too young. Well, that's, first of all, that's why they have the medical and
Blockers.
mental health professionals that
That's
have
why
to
you get
analyze
the
kids and
blockers.
also the parents and also the kids themselves. And this is also why, right-wingers somehow think that kids can't, choose to socially transition because they might be born a girl, but they are actually a boy, like pretty simple. They can't do that. They can't, with the help of literal professionals, go any further than that either. But they definitely are responsible enough if you are the victim of rape, let's say, at 10, because you always
Give
are. at
birth
10
and care of
fucking
a
years
child.
old. You
Yeah,
are
of course.
mature enough. You are old enough to be able to give birth to your rapist child. Totally normal ideas coming from the Republican Party. They love
Right.
to use the word mutilation when they talk about trans people. Yeah, and the reason why they do it is because it's inflammatory. They
Yeah,
talk
it's
about it
shocking.
in these very
Of
grotesque
course.
ways, which are completely contradictory to the actual reality of the matter, because it's meant to scare people.
Yeah,
it's
it's
meant to
meant
scare
to
people who
shock
don't
people.
know anything about trans issues, trans healthcare, into thinking, oh my god, this is what they're doing? Little
Yep.
Jimmy says that he's a girl, and then the next day he
It's
goes...
supposed to shock people. It's supposed to disgust people. That is the strategy. And it's supposed to speak to the base that is already bigoted, already finds this disgusting, and they're supposed to agree happily and then vote. That's one of the goals here.
goes to the
Definitely.
doctor and they chop his fucking genitals off. Oh my god, that's so crazy. And the stupid ass motherfuckers that vote for these people are actually willing to believe that because
Yep.
they've been victims of indoctrination, propaganda, lack of funding for their schooling. And, as Trump has always said, they're big fans of the uneducated. He loves the uneducated because they're more willing to vote for Republicans.
Yeah.
There's a reason why universities, colleges tend to skew more liberal, because the more you actually learn about objective reality and the facts of the world, the less likely you are to be a
right-wing you
conservative.
are.
But anyway.
That's right.
All of this is literally counterfactual, counter-science, counter-reality, all meant to whip up votes in the midterms
don't care
and
about
also
reality.
just cause suffering
You should
to people
realize
who are
that.
literally just
They
trying
do
to live their
not
lives.
care
That's
about
it. There's no
reality.
other benefit. They don't care about any of the shit that I've been talking about. All of my
That's right.
debunking of their points.
That's
they don't
right.
care. All of the actual reality of the matter that I've been talking about, they do not care.
That's
I'm
right.
still going to make the arguments because I find it necessary so people understand them, and hopefully people on the fence
But it's not
are
the
motivated
thing
to
that they
become more likely
operate
to
on.
agree with my
It's also
position as it is
important
backed
to-
up by actual fact. But
It's
like,
almost super important to realize that this is not the thing that they operate on. They operate on reaching their bigoted base, bringing more people to their bigoted base, and amassing more power. This is everything that they care about. And making us suffer, of course.
They don't care about any of that shit. They just want trans people to not exist anymore. That's
Yeah.
literally it. That's it.
And
They
then
don't want
they
trans
will
people to
find
exist.
another
Very
group to
simple.
oppress.
Very cut, very clean. So what they will do is
Because
they're
they
going to try to
always need
ban
enemies.
trans healthcare for minors. They're also going to try to ban trans healthcare for all
adults.
ages. They're also
That's
going
right.
to try to outlaw cross-dressing, and that is related to the drag stuff, so that
Ridiculous.
you can't even socially transition, i.e. just wear
Ridiculous.
clothes that they say contradict your gender identity or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. They're going to exacerbate conditions that lead to higher rates of depression and suicidality
Yep.
in youth as well as adults, and make
Because
them more
they
likely to take
do
their own
not
lives.
care.
Because them creating conditions that make people more likely to commit suicide is them being nice to you. They're being kind. Them putting you in a position where you think of taking your own life is a kindness from them. Because if they had their way, they would literally just kill you. Like, I'm tired of beating around the bush. It has become abundantly clear.
Yep.
Like, at some point, maybe, there could have been some debate about that, but they simply don't want trans people to exist.
There is no debate anymore. Well, there has never been a debate in my mind, to be honest. It's always been the strategy. In Poland, it was the president saying during his campaign, the LGBT are not people, they are an ideology. Of course, there was never a debate. They would just kill every single one of us. Of course.
We've seen this movie before when it comes to, I don't know, the tired comparison of, say, Germany, some
Yep.
decades ago. We've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. If you look at the stages of genocide as laid out by the Holocaust Museum and a variety of other academics who have studied the Holocaust,
That's
you'll notice
right.
that we're kind of several steps in on that genocide of trans people that the Republicans and right-wingers want to do, and that's just
That's right.
it. That's it. There's not really any other way to put it. So what needs to be done about this is these people need to not be in positions of power. You've got to mobilize and protest on the ground. You've got to create alternative
need to push
networks to
back.
the current supply chain,
We
build
need to
dual
keep
power,
getting informed
organize
and
in
keep
communities,
pushing
and all this
back.
kind of shit. Hopefully,
Yeah.
if you want to engage with electoralism, obviously vote for the least bad option in the general, which is going to be the Democrats. Vote for the best option in the primary, which is going to be a Democrat as well, until we can move past the first past the post system and third parties are viable, and then get prepared for the worst. That's all you really can do.
Sadly.
You cut the breasts off a little girl, you should go to prison, of course, to perform
But this doesn't happen. So thank God.
medically unnecessary hysterectomy on a little girl, you should be in prison.
Yeah, but
So,
this doesn't happen. So thank God.
I mean, I assume you're going to get every Republican vote for this.
I should have every single Republican co-sponsor, but
Yeah,
unfortunately,
shockingly, on your pro-child abuse bill, you should,
Right.
because all the Republican Party doesn't give a fuck about actually protecting children.
That's right.
I don't yet. I only have 5 co-sponsors. I'm talking to all of my colleagues
Holy.
and urging them because, Tucker, let me tell
What
you
an
something.
L.
This is a
Jesus.
referendum on the Republican Party. When we take back the majority, if the American people elect us, we have a lot of work to do.
She's
Not
a
only do we need
lunatic.
to impeach Merrick Garland, we need to clean out the corrupt FBI. We need to hold the Democrats accountable and defund all of their climate garbage. 87
Yeah, so these are the real problems. Thank
Yep.
God. Holy shit. We got the real problems on deck. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's here to save the day. These are the people we need in office. The big problems of the day, they're going to impeach
Yeah.
Merrick Garland if they take back power. The current Attorney General in the United States and the Biden administration. For what?
And
For doing his
defund
job.
fighting
They're going to
against
try to clean out the
climate
corrupt
change.
people in the FBI for investigating alleged
Trump,
crimes committed
right.
by the former president, because that's bad somehow that a former president might be held to account for committing crime.
Right.
For defunding their climate garbage after literally, I've started this segment staring literal mass migration that's going to happen if we do nothing from these southern states like Georgia, like Alabama, like Texas, like Florida. A
Well,
bunch of
she's a
people are going to end up
lunatic.
moving to different states here because this shit ain't going to be fun to live in. Really focusing on the important stuff. And for the people who don't have the money to leave, you're just going to get condemned to death by the
Not too
Republican
bad.
Party because that's what they have.
That's
on
what
offer.
they do.
87,000
That's what they
IRS
do.
Army,
That's
but
what they
there's
want.
one thing
Yeah,
that
you got to deal with the 87,000 IRS army that are literally tasked with making sure the rich don't cheat their taxes so that we can actually fund a variety of social welfare programs to make it so that the people that Marjorie Taylor Greene hate and Republicans hate vociferously, the poor, the not well-to-do, the disabled, the elderly, actually have a shot at
At
having a
life.
decent quality of life because Republicans hate all of those groups. Can't
Right.
have that. of course.
We have got to do, and we're not even a party worth deserving of the American people's votes.
True! And I think we'll leave it there. That's actually true. The only way Republicans can win is by weaponizing these culture war issues, by weaponizing the humanity of trans people in order to get votes so that they can literally do nothing for the American people and actually exacerbate conditions that make the American people suffer more. The only way they get votes is by gerrymandering the fuck out of their districts to make sure that they literally cannot lose, by doing all manner of voter suppression because they know historically the less people vote, the lower turnout is for voting, the more likely a Republican is going to win, the higher the turnout, the more likely a Democrat's going to win. They're going to use the Moore v. Harper case with this activist Supreme Court and make it so essentially red states can just hand the election to the Republican candidate for president in the future because of the independent state legislature doctrine. This is the only way they can win because they don't have any actual policy for you. They've got nothing.
Right.
So, of course, the bill that Marjorie Taylor Greene has brought up is a ban on care and forced detransition for trans teens. It bans insurance coverage for adult trans healthcare as well. So it's not just about the children. They want to ban trans healthcare for literally everybody because they don't want trans people to exist. Bans higher education accreditation from teaching trans healthcare. Aaron Green goes on to say, the aim is to detransition as many people, including adults, as possible by removing insurance coverage, targeting people who teach.
So basically, you want people to kill themselves.
Psychology programs
That's what it is.
to recommend gender-affirming care to trans people. The
Are
bill
you
is 100%
insane?
genocide, literally definitionally as well. We've gone over this in previous videos. It would bar EMTs from learning about how to care for trans people. It would bar therapists from recommending the best medical care and the literal standards of care, the medical consensus.
Banning
it would bar medical schools from teaching surgeons and endocrinologists. It's genocidal, and elimination is to its core.
Look at this. This sounds so. It would bar therapy. It's so insane. This is insane. I can't.
That's literally it. If you want to see who the Republican Party is, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a really good representative of that because she doesn't know how to keep the mask on. The mask always is slipping with her. She's talking about Jewish space lasers. She's minimizing the Holocaust. She's speaking at neo-Nazi conferences. She is currently pushing this pro-child abuse bill. Like, she is the Republican Party. Donald Trump as well. Really difficult to keep the mask on with that guy. If you want to know who it is, if you don't know why you have to be fucking motivated to organize, not even just electorally, but outside of the electoral system as well, against Republicans and conservatives, here you go. Here's some more information for you. Maybe get you moving on that. For those who aren't catching it, the Affordable Care Act money goes to private insurers. Employers use this money to subsidize. If they bar ACA subsidization, employers will no longer offer the plans. So in addition to this absolute fucking lunacy and promotion of child abuse from the Republican Party and conservatives and transphobes in general, apparently the group Moms for Liberty, which is actively banning books across the country, terrorizing queer kids, and taking over school boards, is calling for LGBTQ kids to be put in separate classrooms, quote, like kids with autism and Down syndrome. They want to other trans youth and LGBTQ youth to the point of putting them in separate classes. The reasons why kids with autism and Down syndrome and other learning difficulties, educational difficulties, will be put in separate classrooms is usually because it allows those kids to get the more targeted, specialized care and education that they need in order to get the most out of the education system. That's one of the reasons for these separate classes to happen, because with how underfunded the education system is in the United States, public education in specific, because Republicans want to defund public education as much as they can, because they want to be able to indoctrinate your kids and propagandize to them and whitewash history. There's going to be too many kids for one teacher to, have to teach already. So if there are any kids that have special needs when it comes to education, like those with autism or Down syndrome, sucks to suck, I guess, if you're those kids, unless you have that specialized care at these schools. So they want to put LGBTQ kids in separate classrooms, maybe not in the same classrooms, maybe in their own, and do essentially segregation 2.0, except instead of it being white and black and brown people being separated, it's going to be queer people and non-queer people, I guess. And for what benefit? Who the fuck knows? Literally just to cause more people to suffer. That's literally it. So let's see what absolute deranged lunacy we have here.
Kids that do have they're confused or they are gay or whatnot, that the way that they're trying to go about it is to make it an open conversation, an open thing in classrooms. But like, for example, children with autism, Down syndrome, they have to have special IEP
So
needs,
basically,
they have to be put into separate classrooms. And I understand because it's a different type of education for children with those disabilities, but I think that for children that identify differently, there should also be like a specialized something for them so that they feel that they're important enough that they're being counseled.
And why not have that conversation that you're explaining in front of everyone?
Like, literally, to what benefit? If you understand that kids with autism or Down syndrome get specialized education, and that's why they have different classes than those without those learning difficulties, what are we just assuming that, you know, LGBTQ youth also have learning difficulties? No, they don't. They
No,
put
they
this
do
nice
not.
little, you know, veneer of, oh, well, we want to make it so that the LGBTQ youth, they're like actually represented and they're cared for.
No,
They don't. They want queer people away from their kids, even though
That's
they might
right.
have queer kids and their kids are fucking scared to death to come out to their parents because they know they'll get abused by fucking reprehensible
Again,
demons like this and Marjorie Taylor Greene, et cetera,
we
et
all
cetera.
know what
They're gonna
it's
put that
about.
little veneer over it, like, oh my, we just care so much about
Right.
queer kids. They just want to
We know
separate
what
them
it's
because they don't
about.
want their kids to understand that queer people exist, and
That's
that's
right.
okay because they don't think it's
they
okay.
want to
They don't think it's okay
separate.
for queer people to exist.
They want to separate trans people and LGBT people as the group to be shunned, as the group to be persecuted, again, to speak to the base, to gain more power. It's always about that. And later, they will find another group to discriminate about because there always must be a group to discriminate about. Their politics depend on it. They don't run on positive solutions. They run on hate against a group. It's a tried method.
In general, and they don't want their kids to be exposed to that. The reason why is
That's
because
right.
exposure to people that are different from you is a good way for you to learn more about people that are different from you.
That's
It
right,
makes you
Moho,
less
that's
likely
right.
to be bigoted against
Yeah.
them, right? This is why major metropolitan centers, big
You're
cities,
correct,
are more
Moho. It
likely
is
to be
right
socially
easier
progressive
because
there's a higher diversity of
segregated,
people. You know more
isolated,
people that
and
are
it's
black,
easier
brown,
to
queer,
kill.
whatever, and you're less and less likely to be bigoted against them because
That's
you
right.
understand that they're just people like anyone else.
Exactly.
You see them live their lives like everybody else. There's
Exactly.
nothing different there. There's nothing scary there. There's no major
Exactly.
differences at all. And you go about your fucking day. They
Yeah.
don't want that because they want to be able to push to their kids
Yeah.
that being queer is wrong.
So it becomes mundane. The existence of other people becomes mundane, and it becomes much harder for people to be bigoted. That is it, you know? If you accept that the existence of a group is mundane and normal, then it will be much harder to turn you into a bigot.
And they don't want them to get in any other alternative viewpoint.
Exactly,
I think
exactly,
the same reason
Moho.
why teachers wouldn't just bring a child with autism in front of class and be like, hey, he's got autism. Embarrassment.
That is
What is in
exactly
your eyes?
right.
What teacher is bringing up a student and is like, yo, this kid is gay? What are you talking about? It's like these made-up scenarios.
Of course
Like,
it has
his
to be
mom is, like,
made
doing
up.
fucking crack or
Of course
something
it has
and,
to be
like,
made up.
passes out and has these dreams and visions
Like,
about
yeah, of
these
course.
things happening, and then like thinks that this is actually happening in
needs
the real
to
world.
be
It's not
made up.
happening, man. What are you talking about? Like, these people are delusional.
If
Embarrassed.
any of this was based on reality, then the whole ideology would fall apart. They don't operate on facts and reality. They do have to operate in fear-mongering and made-up stories in order to rile up their base to vote and give them power, as always.
Embarrassment.
what
It
is
needs to be
embarrassing about
based in fantasy,
It's not that it's something to be embarrassed about, but I'm sure
because
that you
otherwise
understand
it
a
would
lot
not
of
work
kids that are
ever.
young and feel gay, some of them are shamed.
It just would
They
not
have-
work.
Because of people like you fucking bitch. What are
Exactly.
you talking about? It's like, oh my god, the kids, the queer people, they got to be in different classes because you don't want to be embarrassed. And the reason why they're embarrassed is because I literally want to put
Yeah. You know what embarrassed? Being hated really embarrasses you, you know? This is ridiculous. This is so stupid. But this is also so typical of the conservative mindset. They first discriminate against people, literally the cycle of they discriminate against people, they create a hostile environment, and then they turn around and say, oh, these people need to be separated. Why? Because they get discriminated against. This is like, I don't even know what to say.
In another fucking class other them to all of the other
This is
kids.
so
You know how
ridiculous.
historically the special needs kids, the people in those specialized classes, are historically made fun of by
Yeah.
shitty kids in school? They
Yeah.
are otherized to the point where people will make fun of them. It's almost like the call is coming from inside the fucking house on this
Well,
one.
what do you
Jesus
know?
Christ, man. I don't know how you get these people back into reality. I don't know how you do it. Like, the indoctrination and propaganda they've been subject to by...
You know what you do first? You first move them away from any position of power. That's what you do. You do not allow these people into any position of decision making, and then you figure out what to do. But this is the first step. Because if you do, they will basically just kill us all. For their mad quest for power. This is just...
the conservatives in this country is so fucking fierce that you produce people like this and Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Some of them are shamed.
Because
They
they can't openly
feel
talk
that-
about it in their classroom.
Right, which I understand, but
You,
But
there's just a way to go about it. That everybody is respected.
yeah, so it is true. This is literally why school board meetings and getting elected to positions on the school board is very important for the left to be engaged in.
Yes.
Because these are the kinds of people
Yes.
that are making
please do it. Please get more involved in schools. Because if this is the future of schooling, then we're in big trouble. If only crazy conservative people are allowed into schools. Poland already has a crazy far-right lunatic as the Minister of Education. We must do something about it.
decisions in these schools that are playing a part in making these
must.
decisions. Like, you're smoking a crack pipe, having visions of fucking delusion, and then thinking that's actually happening in reality, and then trying to change the way a school works? Like,
Yeah.
what are we doing here? You should absolutely be going to your school board meetings and advocating in favor
Yes.
of literally the medical and scientific consensus on this shit.
Yeah.
Advocating in favor of the education for these kids about a variety of topics that people
Yeah.
like this don't want them to learn about because it hurts their feelings or something. It's incredibly
It
important.
doesn't hurt their
You can't have
feelings.
people
Well,
like-
it does hurt their feelings, but it doesn't. But it also, much more importantly, makes them unelectable. A really well-educated base would never, ever dream of voting on lunatics like this. If people get good education, if people really learn what's going on, then Republicans would never win any elections ever. This is why the Republicans are so against education, insert themselves into education, and try to spread BS like this, and try to create groups to hate. Because,
make 'em
as
bigger.
you said yourself, educated people tend to be left-leaning, not conservatives.
decisions in school. That's ridiculous. There's no shot. So we touched on this in a previous video. This was about the Florida Board of Medicine ruling that people getting Medicaid, you can't be getting trans healthcare, essentially. I unfortunately didn't see this tweet in that segment. I'm going to bring it up here. It says, I need to emphasize something here. Part of this rulemaking by the Florida Board of Medicine will be to require all trans adults who receive hormones for the purpose of transition to sign a waiver full of bullshit. That waiver is transmitted to the Florida Department of Health, which would essentially create a government list of trans people.
Oh,
So not only do
screw
they want
that.
queer kids to have
Oh,
separate
screw
classes
that.
and be segregated
Oh,
from
no.
non-queer kids, aka in their eyes normal kids,
Screw
they also
that.
want to have a list of all trans people in
What is this, mutant registration bill in real life? Why am I not even surprised that a comic book villain plot is being written as a bill in the US? Why am I not even surprised by this at this point? A little comic book plot is being adapted as a proposed bill.
Florida. You know, I don't know that I need to tell you, if you're watching my content, why that's not really the best idea. No, if they're going so far as to claim that giving people trans health care, following the standards of care, medical and scientific consensus, when it comes to trans health care, if you're going to call that a Class C felony, and then in Florida they're trying to create a list of trans people, well, there you go. There's your list of people to arrest. The people who are caring for them, as well as the people doing it. Reminds me of a list the Germans created back in the 1930s. Well, surely we can't draw any comparisons to, the Germany in the 1930s. No way, that would be an overreaction. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she recently
That would be
visited...
such an overreaction, considering that survivors of Auschwitz directly make that connection.
The Holocaust Museum, and then went on to speak at a neo-Nazis conference, so she knows. So, of course, the literal incarnation of the devil himself, if he is this, if he does exist, and he is this, evil person who wants everybody to suffer, the Republican Party personified, we got Ron DeSantis saying on Glenn Beck's show, I don't know why the fuck you go on Glenn Beck's show. The man has not been relevant in a long time. Quote, if a 14-year-old can't get a tattoo, that child should not be able to take puberty blockers and mutilate their body by getting a sex change. Gender-affirming care is a euphemism for disfiguring kids. But, given the overturn of Roe v. Wade and the anti-abortion laws, the pro-forced birth laws, those 14-year-olds, if they're the victims of rape, because they always would be.
They don't care.
A fucking adult. They're certainly old enough to be able to carry that baby to term. That's Ron DeSantis.
Forcing children that have no scalp to turn? Of course. Yeah, of course. That's totally normal. Totally typical of the conservatives.
His position on the matter. Goes on to talk about all manner of bullshit, but I wanted to look at Eli Elrich's tweet thread on it. She has recently been the target of people like Matt Walsh of Chaya Raichik, the owner of the Libs of TikTok account. She was
Matt
also
Walsh, another lunatic that knows nothing and that built a career on basically making stuff up. A whole documentary that is, quote unquote, a documentary full of BS and manipulation and misinformation. This is horrible. The fact that totally illiterate and stupid people build whole careers on hate and bigotry. This is
one of the first people to break the news that Matt Walsh was making what ended up becoming the quote-unquote What is a Woman documentary, which essentially misled trans people into thinking they were going to be part of a pro-trans documentary, and got, unfortunately, some of them to do that. Eli was one of the early people to sniff that out and post about it earlier on.
I still remember.
Horrific misinformation. Not going to watch the video because, why should we? Let's debunk DeSantis' claims. First, Sweden did not ban trans minors from care. This is a lie. One hospital there now refuses trans care to those under 16. Staff followed a, quote, precautionary rule based on legal fear, not data. He also went on to cite an, quote-unquote, 80%...
It's always based on fear and not on data. Because if it was based on data, then the care would be provided. Because the data is pretty conclusive when it comes to these topics, at least. It's not something that wasn't tested, that has never been put for scrutiny.
Statistic. So that statistic comes from Kenneth Zucker's long since debunked research. He's grouping in boys that like pink with trans kids saying, quote, I am a girl. This is the absolute scientific rigor, the analysis of transphobes and conservatives, and what constitutes...
This is illiteracy, internet. This is illiteracy. What the... Lumping people who are trans with people that just like the color pink. What? In conservatives' minds, if you like color pink, that means you, are a girl? What? This is so stupid. Ridiculous.
Good data.
There are many cis, straight men that like the color pink. It's not...
Republican Party. A boy saying, I like the color pink, which is going to be seen in our society as a kind of gender non-conforming thing.
In Poland, among lawyers, among lawyer men, pink shirt was a big part of fashion. What is this nonsense?
to trans kids literally saying I am a girl or whatever, right?
This
Actual
is
desistance
so
is regularly reported to be
ridiculous.
between 1 and 2.5%, incredibly low. Also, trans care is not experimental. Another common talking point you'll hear
Yes,
from these
it is
absolute
not.
fucking fools, that it's
It is
experimental.
absolutely not
There is a lot of
experimental.
history
It's been
behind it.
around
And
for
we keep talking about
many,
Germany
many
in the 30s
years.
and whatnot, and we might as well keep talking about them. Some of the first books that the Nazis burned was from the Institute of Sexual Health, which was founded by a gay Jewish man, where all manner
Very
of
nice.
trans healthcare was logged. The first vaginoplasty was performed there.
Mm-hmm.
The first books the Nazis burned was about trans and gender-related healthcare. Trans care is
what
not
do you know?
experimental. We have over 90 years of science on medical transition of
Yes.
adults and minors. The book, The Transsexual Phenomenon, even became a 1966 bestseller studying the benefits and side effects of hormone therapy and surgery. Nobody is giving 14-year-olds bottom surgery, nor is that the only trans surgery. Bottom surgery options typically start around age 16 on a case-by-case basis. The regret rate is under 1%. If
Yeah.
you look at the regret
What
rate
do you
for a
know?
variety of other procedures, like I believe hip
Turns out
replacements
that
have
when
a
people,
higher regret rate.
it turns out that when people are allowed to be themselves, not a whole lot of them regret it. Well, what
It's
do you
literally
know?
all lies.
What do you know?
That's the opposition that we have. And unfortunately, because of the participation trophy that is the Electoral College, that is gerrymandering, that is voter suppression, the Republicans are able to maintain power in our government and push their delusions onto everybody else. Continuing along, Florida added puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and gender reassignment surgery as, quote, not medically necessary to treat gender dysphoria. It will pull all Floridians who receive hormone therapy off of their coverage for their medication. This is trans adults. So they'll consistently fearmonger about kids, but they also don't want trans adults to be able to get any kind of gender-related care because they don't want trans people to exist. The new rule change goes into effect on August 21st. It's specifically for Medicaid, although private insurers often will refer to
I don't know
Medicaid
much
to
about
determine what
the
is medically
US
necessary
medical
for them to
system.
cover. Also, tangentially, the ACLU is now going to be suing Florida over the Stop Woke Act that Ron DeSantis
What
recently
act?
signed.
Stop
Severely
woke
restricts
act?
discussions of race
So
and gender in college and university classrooms. So the Don't Say Gay bill and related anti-CRT
Oh
moral
my
panic that
God.
they were talking about until they realized that weaponizing the humanity of trans people was far more lucrative for them. They always talk about, oh, the kids, they can't be learning this. The kids. It's also people in college and university. Young adults and adults. They're trying to bar from being able to learn anything about the actual history of this country, the actual
Yeah.
science as it pertains
you
to
learn-
gender and sex being different.
Yes, when you learn about racism in the US, that's a bad thing because conservatives won't allow it. So stupid.
And all manner of things related
would have
to
been
that.
too good to
They're going
be
to say
true,
it's simple.
wouldn't it?
This unconstitutional censorship law will have a chilling effect on freedom of
Far too
expression in
good.
higher education. So for the longest time, absolute
Mm-hmm.
fucking idiots like Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, etc., all these people, Jordan Peterson, who have been
Idiots that, by the way, are considered to be intellectuals. And yet, they use the stupidest arguments that only the stupidest people believe and accept. Nothing based in any facts, nothing based in any data. Ironically enough, for a person that has built a career on this saying, facts don't care about your feelings.
super excited to go to college campuses to speak and, debate unprepared college kids and pretend that they've won, even though that they are almost always wrong about what they're talking about. It's just that the people they're debating are literally, it's like man on the street type shit.
They're
They're
just
talking
not
about, "Oh my
prepared
God,
to talk about these things. They basically get drowned out, shouted out. They get nervous. They don't get their point across perfectly, which is normal in these sort of circumstances, isn't it? I'll be right back. And then we will continue reacting to this thing together with Conure. Be right back. Okay, I am back. I have returned. And now I will be continuing watching this video together with everybody.
And all this, liberal colleges, they're indoctrinating the youth or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
And these snowflakes, they want safe spaces. They're so afraid of
Oh,
differing
no.
opinions. College is supposed to be where you're supposed to go to get your ideas challenged, to hear opinions that differ from yours. You silly little snowflakes. Well, it turns out the call was coming from the inside of the house on that one as well, because these snowflakes who can't deal with the actual history of the founding of this country as it pertains to critical race theory at a collegiate level, because that's when that is taught, as well as the scientific and medical consensus on the difference between gender and sex and other related topics, they're too pussy to hear about that shit because it makes them uncomfortable because they're fucking bitches. So they're trying to ban that as well in Florida because Ron DeSantis' tiny little limp dick needs to get elected. Florida lawmakers are trying to impose restrictions on teaching or even expressing views they disagree with. The law is also incredibly vague, just like the Don't Say Gay bill was, making it nearly impossible
Well,
educators...
it needs to be vague because it makes it easier to broadly interpret and discriminate against more people. Of course. I mean, that's basically like that's a no-brainer. It makes it easier to discriminate the more vague it is. That's obvious.
to
That's
know
pretty
what
obvious.
exactly falls under it. The First Amendment
Yeah.
protects the right to learn for educators
And the less
students.
you
The
know
Stop Woke
what
Act
it's
deprives
about,
classrooms of
the
important
less you
learning
can do
tools
to
and
oppose it
conversations
as
to
well.
challenge racism and sexism, and discriminates against black educators and students, which
Well,
is
what do you
literally
know?
the stated goal of the Republican Party.
Yep.
To promote racism, to promote sexism, and to discriminate against anybody who isn't a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yes.
Okay? Very simple. The Republican Party is a white supremacist party. That's the ultimate goal. When they say they're originalists when it pertains to the Constitution, they mean it literally. They want to
Yeah.
go back to the conditions of this country's founding. When black and brown people were slaves, women were second-class citizens and the property of their husbands and fathers, where white men would get power simply for being white men. Also back when child labor was, allowed. This is what they
When
want. That's what
some
the
people
party
were
is.
not
And this
quote-unquote
idea that we need
white.
to pretend that there's any kind of good ideas on both sides and there's this marketplace of ideas
Nope,
that we have to worry
nope,
about. It's
none of
fucking
that
stupid. Don't be
cowardly
a
crap.
fucking idiot. I
Yeah.
am literally not telling you anything that you don't already know.
Yep.
You already understand all of this. You've seen
That's
throughout
right.
your history, even if you're fairly young, that the Republican Party literally
I'm
never
not that
pushes for
young.
anything that would actually help any people in the United States of America. They actually push for shit that
Not
makes
just
things
in
worse. They
US.
push for the fucking country and the Earth's
Not
climate getting so
just in
bad
the
that
US.
when you get older, you're going to suffer even more because of their inaction, because they got to get money from the fossil fuel companies and do their goddamn bidding. They're going to just demonize queer, black, brown people to get
Yeah,
votes
they have to.
from their uneducated base. It's very
Yes.
clear. It's plain as day. They are
Yep.
literally telling you who they are.
Yep.
I feel like I'm coming off in this segment with less patience than I might in previous
Well, we
segments
don't-
because I'm just talking about the same.
We don't need patience, we need action together. I think the time for patience has passed. I think we're long past patience at this point. The time for patience has passed.
Shit over and over again. Because
Yeah.
every single goddamn day, there's some new fucking stupid bullshit from the
Yep.
Republican Party, from conservatives, some made-up fucking delusions that they've
That's
had in
right.
like a fever dream one day, that they're trying to push onto everybody else because they're uncomfortable with the actual world we live in. And it gets a little boring. And, the only thing I can really do at this point to spice it up is be a little fucking aggro about it, I
Yeah.
guess. So at least it's good that the ACLU is suing.
I mean, that's
Florida,
good.
and hopefully,
That's
something
good.
good comes of this. Also, along the lines of conservatives not being the biggest fans of stopping child abuse, we've got, in Texas, this is from the Houston Chronicle, a flood of 2,300 departing workers leave Texas Child Welfare Agency scrambling, quote, absolutely a crisis. So nearly 2,300 employees have left the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services since the beginning of the year, stressing an agency that has already experienced some of the highest turnover rates of any large state department. Article goes on to say, of the 2,267 employees who left the agency by August 3rd, about 83% of them had quit, the highest voluntary exit rate the department has has seen since it became an independent agency in fall 2017. Quote, the focus has been taken so far away from child safety that I don't want to do this job anymore, said a current Houston area caseworker. The worker, like the others quoted in the article, spoke on condition of anonymity, saying they feared repercussions for discussing the agency's internal problems. Another said she quit because of unmanageable workloads and pressure to close multiple cases a day, even though she believed more investigation was needed. Several others said they were offended by Governor Greg Abbott's order to launch child abuse investigations into families of transgender children, literally creating more work over a non...
Okay, yeah, that's what we really need. When a child comes out as trans, we really need to persecute the parents that decide to help them. That's what we need. We need to punish parents for being good parents, because this is what protection of children is all about. That's what it's all about.
Stressing an agency that is already overworked to the point where now 2,300 of them have fucking left. Meaning that if you actually gave a fuck about protecting children, you probably wouldn't be doing what Greg Abbott is doing in Texas, because you've essentially just created conditions that led to the gutting of your fucking child protection agency, and now less and less children are going to be protected because there's less and less people doing the work to do that. You fucking piece of shit. You absolute loser. These people don't care. They like it when children are abused. That's it.
Yep.
That's it. Republicans, conservatives, they don't
Not
care.
just children. They like it when children are abused. They like it when adults are abused. And then they capitalize on the abuse and gain more power. Rinse and repeat.
They're either complacent in the abuse of children, or
they
they
do it
like
themselves.
That's it. See also, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Or they like it, or they simply outright partake in it.
See also, Greg Abbott. See also, Ron DeSantis. See also, Matt Gaetz. See also, everybody else in the Republican Party.
True.
But we're not done yet. An hour into this segment, we're finally moved on to the next part of it. Vice News has recently reported from August 17, 2022, far-right extremists are threatening to, quote, execute doctors at a children's hospital.
What?
Thank the fucking Lord above.
I'm
So
sorry.
much shit happening in this country.
I'm sorry. What's happening now? Republican, like, far-righters want to execute doctors at a children's hospital. That sounds like some sort of a plot for a movie, or like again, a comic book. A villain.
But we're really focusing on the real matter at hand, which is threatening doctors at a children's hospital. If you needed any other evidence that these people are literally just evil pieces of shit that want people to suffer,
I don't need evidence.
here you go. I can think of nothing more heinous than threatening the doctors at a children's hospital.
Of execution.
The viral Twitter account Libs of TikTok promoted a lie about gender-affirming care at the hospital, and now doctors are getting death threats. Boston Children's Hospital said on Tuesday that its staff has faced a flood of violent threats and harassment sparked by a false claim made by the viral Libs of TikTok Twitter account. The account, run by Brooklyn real estate agent Shia Raichik, tweeted on August 11th that, quote, Boston...
Will there be any consequences for the Libs of TikTok? Of course not. Of course not.
Children's Hospital is now offering gender-affirming hysterectomies for young girls. The claim has been widely debunked by fact-checking groups.
No.
Shockingly. You know, a right-winger just lying? No way. But as is typical in anti-trans rhetoric, facts rarely matter, and the claims were shared widely on right-wing social media accounts. As a result, the hospital and its staff have faced a torrent of abuse. Quote, in response to commentary last week critical of our gender multi-specialty service program, Boston Children's Hospital has been the target of a large volume of hostile internet activity, phone calls, and harassing emails, including threats of violence toward our clinicians and staff, the hospital said in a statement posted to Twitter. So the actual hospital had to put out a statement about it. This is having real-world ramifications. It's not just some online
yeah,
shit.
of course.
The hospital did not specify where the threats were coming from, but Vice News has uncovered
Right-wingers
some violent
are
threats
first
posted
and
on far-right and
foremost
extreme
interested
platforms
in
targeting the doctors.
real-life
Long past time to
harassment.
start executing these doctors. A member of a pro-Trump message
sorry,
board,
what?
formerly known as the Donald, wrote under a copy of a video featuring a doctor from the hospital. This message board is the same one whose members last week doxed and made violent threats against the judge who signed the search warrant that allowed the FBI to search the home of former President Donald Trump. The forum's members encouraged one another to post negative remarks on the hospital's YouTube videos, which were ultimately removed as a result of an influx of comments. Another member posted the phone number of the hospital and encouraged others to call them on the phone.
Of
So, you know, if
course.
this hospital is getting called for things that, you know, a hospital would normally get called for, well, the lines might be a little clogged from absolute fucking degenerate losers on the internet who
That's
are
right.
afraid of the idea that children are getting health care. There were similar reactions to the claims in far-right and conspiracy-minded Telegram groups. Quote, demons like this do not deserve to breathe. Crimes against humanity equals death. One Telegram user wrote under a link to one of the articles featuring the false claims. Quote, these people are psychopaths and should be locked up, another wrote. On both platforms, the doctors and hospital staff were referred to as, quote, pedophiles and, quote,
Insane.
groomers, attacks that have become a mainstay of Republican orthodoxy.
I'm sorry,
in recent
what?
months. By the way, the use of the term
Groomer again?
who are afraid of the idea that
Again?
children are getting health
Again
care.
with this
There were
term?
similar reactions to the claims in far-right and conspiracy-minded Telegram groups. Quote,
wanna
demons
see
like this
this
do not
again.
deserve to breathe. Crimes against humanity equals
Let's
death.
watch
One
this
Telegram
again.
user wrote under a link to one of the articles featuring the false claims. Quote, these people are psychopaths and should be locked up, another
Mm-hmm.
wrote. On both platforms, the doctors and hospital staff were referred to as, quote, pedophiles and, quote,
Of
groomers,
course.
attacks that have become a mainstay of
Because
Republican orthodoxy.
Grooming is when doctors provide health care to children. Grooming can mean anything to right-wingers.
A month. By the
Literally
way, the use of
anything.
the term groomers like this has literally been called out by groups that are trying to stop child abuse, trying
Yeah.
to stop
Well, no
child
kidding.
trafficking, telling
Like,
these people
grooming apparently now is when you provide health care to children. And do you know why right-wingers want to obscure the term? Because they are into real grooming themselves, and they want to make the term meaningless.
people to stop
That's why.
misusing the term in this way, because it's literally making it harder for them to do their job and protect kids. Republicans, right-wingers,
Don't
conservatives
care.
don't care if kids are abused. Rychick's account, which has over 1
Yeah,
million followers,
because they usually partake in the abuse. They don't care.
has been at the forefront of the right's anti-LGBTQ campaign, which has also targeted schools and libraries in the recent months. Also, somehow still allowed to operate on Twitter completely unchecked. Sometimes they
What a
catch a mute
surprise.
here and there. Not much going on other than that. Twitter kind of being pussies about this one. It's the same tactic that has been deployed for years by anti-abortion groups and is still being used in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Twitter did not immediately respond to Vice News' request for comment on whether Rychick's latest tweet broke its rules, because they're fucking pussy. That's
Yeah.
the simple fact of the matter. We've done videos before on Libs of TikTok. The entire account is literally just stochastic terrorism via
Yeah.
account. They post the dates and addresses of a variety of LGBTQ events. They post the docs and information of a variety of doctors, offices, phone
People,
numbers, a
real
lot of these
people.
which could be publicly available. But the big problem with them
And they, of course, post lies after lies after lies.
posting them is because they routinely also tag on there the fact that they think that these people are groomers, pedophiles, child
Exactly.
abusers, and it's an implicit
So, in other words, they lie. They keep lying.
call for violence. That's what
Yeah.
it is. We've seen this happen before, actually.
We
Some
have.
of you might not know, but if you're like a Zoomer or younger in the audience, Tiller the baby killer, quote unquote, might be familiar to you otherwise. So, Dr. George Tiller was a doctor who performed abortion in Wichita, Kansas. Bill O'Reilly made a lot of hay out of talking about Dr. George Tiller. Fox News Channel commentator Bill O'Reilly has also been accused of demonizing Tiller. O'Reilly was found to have mentioned Tiller by name on The O'Reilly Factor, his show on the Fox News Channel, 42 separate times prior to Tiller's death. referring to him specifically as a, quote, baby killer in 24 instances. So Fox News, one of the most watched news sources on TV, and Bill O'Reilly, who was an
Fox
incredibly
News.
popular host, was
Television
regularly accusing this guy of murder, to the point where, eventually, Scott Roeder, an absolute piece of shit, an anti-abortion extremist, fucking killed him, assassinated him. Tiller was killed during a Sunday
mean,
morning service at his church,
that is what
Reformation
happens.
Lutheran Church, where he was serving as an usher. Tiller had previously survived an assassination attempt in 1993 when Shelley Shannon shot him in the arms. Roeder was arrested within 3 hours of the shooting and charged with first-degree murder and related crimes 2 days later. In November 2009, Roeder publicly confessed to the killing, telling the Associated Press that he had shot Tiller because, quote, preborn children's lives were in imminent danger, which is literally just a lie that he's been fed by right-wing media.
Yeah.
And then Bill O'Reilly was fired, right? No, actually, no. Bill O'Reilly kept his job until all of the lawsuits that Bill O'Reilly was getting filed against him and Fox News
And this
by
is
the
what's
women that
happening
worked
to
at
this
Fox
day.
News, who accused
You just get
O'Reilly
a new
of
Riley,
sexual misconduct in the
new
workplace,
person,
ended up becoming too
and
costly for the network, so Fox News had to
continue
let
the
him
same
go.
thing.
They knew
Oh,
that he
yeah.
was sexually
They now have
harassing
Tucker
the
Carlson.
female workers in Fox News
What do
in
you
the
know?
studio. But they didn't care about that. They didn't fire him over that. In fact, they protected him for a while,
Yeah, of
using their
course.
war chest because they love protecting abusers. And then they finally let him go when the lawsuits became too costly.
And now they have
Roeder was
Tucker
found guilty of
Carlson.
first-degree
What do you
murder
know?
and 2 counts of aggravated assault on January 29, 2010, and sentenced on April 1st, 2010, to life imprisonment without any chance of parole for 50 years. The sentence was later reduced to
They
allow the
have
possibility of
other
parole after
people
serving
now.
25 years. So we've seen how this kind of rhetoric can actually lead to real-world violence.
Yeah,
That is
and we can
stochastic
see it
terrorism. See
still
also
now.
the Christchurch shooter citing Lauren Southern. Other
Yeah.
manifestos that have Ben Shapiro being the perpetrator of the mass shootings most watched or engaged with social media accounts. See also the Patriot Front or Patriot Prayer, whatever the fuck, people that were stopped in a U-Haul on their way to a Pride event during Pride Month who were armed
Yeah.
with a variety of weapons.
Yeah.
Luckily, the police actually stopped them this time around. Turns out they didn't have enough police on their side like they normally would, like the Proud Boys would, for instance, to be able to get away with this kind of shit. So going back to the article, the claim was instantly picked up and amplified by a slew of right-wing influencers and media personalities. Quote, this is monstrous. Stephen Miller, a literal white supremacist. Like, he's even got Nazi physiognomy and phrenology. Like, come on. Others who
What?
boosted the false claim included the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh and conservative websites such as the Post-Millennial Literal Rag, the Gateway Pundit.
Daily
also
Wire is one of the worst places, I think. Like it recently attained Jordan Peterson, who became insane.
a rag, and the Daily Caller, literally also a rag. Quote, we are deeply
They are
concerned by
all
these attacks on our
rags.
clinicians and
Let's
staff
be
fueled by
honest here.
misinformation and a lack of understanding and respect for our transgender community, the hospital said. The article and the online attention that followed was based on the incorrect statements that Boston Children's performs hysterectomies on minors in connection with transgender care. They don't. As has been
course
pointed out
they
in several
don't.
fact checks about the claims, in order for a hysterectomy to be performed as part of gender-affirming care, Boston Children's Hospital requires a patient to be capable of consenting for themselves. Quote, Boston Children's does not and will not perform a hysterectomy as part of gender-affirming care on a patient under the age of 18, the hospital said in its statement. Despite the outrage about the targeted harassment campaign against Boston Children's Hospital, the staff Reichik on Tuesday posted a similar incendiary tweet targeting Phoenix Children's Hospital because, you know, why stop it harassing and pushing people to threaten and harass the workers at
When you
one
can
children's
continue
hospital
with a
when you
different
can also
hospital.
target another children's hospital
right.
because these people care so much about protecting children.
That's
Quote,
right.
how many more children's hospitals and their providers need to be threatened before you actually do something? Alejandra Caraballo, a clinical instructor at the Harvard Law School Cyber Law Clinic, an LGBTQI plus advocate who has been at the forefront of calling out Reichik's campaign, tweeted on Tuesday. So just for some extra information about Boston Children's Hospital, the first target here when it comes to children's hospitals, at least in this particular story, it's a nationally ranked freestanding acute care children's hospital located in Boston,
So
Massachusetts.
basically,
It's home
targeting hospitals with lies. This is so typical for right-wingers.
to the largest hospital-based pediatric
This is
research
normal
program in the world.
operation.
And Boston Children's Hospital has been ranked as best pediatric medical center by U.S. News and World Report more
This is what it means when right-wingers say that they care about children and care about the abuse of children. To them, children having good health care is abuse. This is what they see as abuse. Children being safe, secure, and having good health care. I guess this is abuse now. Oh yeah, and good education, because conservatives also hate education.
Times than any other hospital, and is currently ranked as the best children's hospital in the United States. Certainly, they might know a thing or two more than bumfuck Chaya Raichik, failed realtor, about pediatric care. Like, come on, man. What are you doing? How can you be on the side of harassing literally the best children's hospital in the United States and still think you're on the good side? Still think you're the good guy? Jesus Christ. So, of course, we've got absolute chincel. Beards are literally just makeup for men, and Matt Walsh is the prime example of that. Matt Walsh here. Media Matters put out a tweet. The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh falsely accused Boston Children's Hospital of putting, quote, every toddler who has ever been born on a path to sterilization and butchery.
Are you insane?
2 days later, the hospital staff was deluged by violent threats. Literally stochastic terrorism. So let's see this neat little comparison that they put up. Literally based on a lie.
Today, the Matt Walsh Show, children's hospitals around the country are butchering, mutilating, and sterilizing their young patients.
So it's not happening. Have you seen this video?
Yeah, of course it's not happening.
It's not truth at all. Alternate reality that these people have to engage with because it makes them money.
No, they have to manufacture this false reality because these people create the rabid fan base for the conservatives that fight for the votes. It's all a well-oiled machine.
For Matt Walsh, anyway.
And it's being also funded by millions of dollars.
And when it comes to the politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene, gets them elected.
According to
This is what happens.
Boston Children's Hospital,
this is what happens.
Literally every toddler who has ever been born or will ever be born is trans.
I can guarantee that's also not the case.
Of course.
Now, if it seems like they're casting the white...
You don't really need to think long and hard to realize that this is bullshit. You don't really need to think that hard about it. That this is just insanity. That this is just creating the extremist far-right base that will vote for extremist far-right candidates. This is just propaganda, and really not really smart propaganda as well. It's really silly propaganda.
Widest imaginable net in order to catch the most children they can and put them all on a path to sterilization and butchery before they can even talk?
Which doesn't happen.
Well, that's because that's exactly what these monsters are doing.
But it's not. Luckily.
It is not.
Thank God. Thank the Lord above.
And they've done it up until this moment without much resistance.
And they haven't gotten much resistance because it's literally not happening. And the medical and scientific insistence and the standards of care as it pertains to trans healthcare contradict the worldview of Matt Walsh. This is why there hasn't been any pushback, because they're not doing anything wrong.
But that has to end. We have to stop making it so easy on them. And that's why I'm in the very early stages of trying to organize a national coordinated effort to fight back against this evil.
Yeah, the evil of literally the best children's hospital.
The evil of giving children health care. Amazing. The evil of giving children health care. Well, I guess it's safe to say that the conservatives have lost the plot.
United States from rendering care to its patient. What an evil thing that this crusade has to be waged again.
No, it's really just a matter of where do we begin. Maybe we begin at Boston Children's Hospital.
Boston Children's Hospital says its staff is being threatened and harassed now after far-right activists on social media posted misinformation claiming they perform gender-affirming hysterectomy procedures on young girls. The hospital says it's not true. They do not perform those procedures for anyone under the age of 18. Boston Children's Hospital says it is proud, though, to be home to the first pediatric and adolescent transgender health program in the United States. The hospital, though, now is working with law enforcement to try to better protect its staff in the face of these lies.
Literally, the
Very
doctors
good.
and staff
Very
here
good.
have had to have extra security because of this.
Yeah,
Like,
because
not to
lunatics
mention
like this
the-
will cause violence to be enacted on them. We know this to be true.
The person who attacked the FBI
We know
office
it.
with a nail gun because of the lies that the Republicans are pushing about the FBI literally just doing their job and trying to get classified documents back from a former
That's a
president.
whole
We
other
already know
story.
that the Republican Party's base has members in it that are willing to do violence. See also the
because they're
January 6th
lunatics.
attempted coup on our
Like, this
nation's
is why
capital.
they have to speak to such a crazy base. And this is, of course, why they fight against education. Because educated people do not end up like this. Educated people do not end up with beliefs like this.
To get Donald Trump back in power.
They
after
need
he
to
lost
fight
an
against
election.
education.
They're very
because
well
otherwise
aware of the
they would
fact that
lose
they have
all of their
absolute
base.
fucking lunatics in their
They would
base
just lose
because
all
they
of
are
their
also
base.
fucking degenerate lunatics that will be willing to go out and do violence in the name of their ideology,
Yeah,
being provoked
that's right.
by literal lies and indoctrination to do so. And they will lose their own lives as well, as we saw on January 6th, as
Yeah.
we saw when that dude fucking attacked that FBI office with a nail gun. The idea that libs of TikTok and Matt Walsh are continuing to operate and are allowed to continue to operate on Twitter, and I would say also on YouTube for Matt Walsh, is patently absurd. Anybody
is.
with any actual reasonable thought process can kind of put two and two together. They've seen how in the past, these lies, these easily falsifiable lies that have been pushed by these people have led to murder,
Violence.
have led to violence. We can
Mm-hmm.
kind of stop that from happening if we actually put pedal to the metal and get these motherfuckers off these programs and
Yeah.
make them have a smaller and smaller megaphone.
Yeah,
you know, if you're wondering if
we should make
deplatforming
them-
works, then yeah, how about you tell me how Milo's media career is doing? A lot
We should make them insignificant. That is exactly what we should do.
You might be asking, Milo who? And exactly, motherfucker. Milo Yiannopoulos, famous ex-gay now, neo-Nazi, who was massive during Gamergate, went on like all manner of news publications, got a lot of media clout. Then he got banned off of literally everything for being a neo-Nazi and also, you know, child abuse advocate. And now nobody gives a shit. He had to say that he's
That's
ex-gay
right.
now and like dresses like the Tiger King in order to get clout. That's the levels he's sunk into. And I think Marjorie Taylor Greene also hired him, funnily enough. So here we have Alejandra Caraballo's post, essentially just detailing the absolute psychopathic fixation that Chaya Raichik of Lives at TikTok has had about Boston Children's Hospital, which has led to all manner of death threats, as we've seen,
What do you
and led
know?
to Boston Children's Hospital having to make a statement about it.
And
So I
hire
don't know. I feel
extra
like we're
security.
kind of all over the place in this segment. I gotta wrap it
Statement, hiring extra security as well.
up quickly though. But you might be wondering, and I've already kind of gone over this, but here's another example. Why do these people continue to be transphobic in this way? It's abundantly clear, as per
They continue to be transphobic in this way because trans people are right now the easiest target to rile up your base against. It is not as acceptable to be homophobic in a traditional way, at least in the US. It's still perfectly acceptable to be that in Poland, but not in the US. In the US, at least, the LGBT rights have somewhat moved forward. So now, the rabid conservatives have moved to the more vulnerable target that is not as protected as the other groups, the transgender people. And also, even though in Poland it's not as acceptable to be gay, the right-wing government has also decided to notice transgender people and target them with harassment. Why? That's because the US does it. And whatever the US right-wing does, the Polish one will do as well in response, like a parrot.
scientific medical consensus, etc., etc., etc. All of the debunked claims that they put out, all of the actual reality being put forward, contradicting what right-wingers say. Why do they keep saying it? Well, as I've written here, the transphobia industrial complex keeps on chugging. So this is from Mimium. on Twitter. They say, to understand the full picture of why anti-LGBT and especially anti-trans hate has increased in the UK. And this is the UK, you know, Turf Island. The US, not much better. You only need to look at the...
Well, not to mention Poland, in which the far right is actually in charge, and in which those topics are being weaponized to galvanize debates and to keep the government fully in power. That is what's happening as well.
The trans-hostile UK mainstream media. So check this out. 13,015. The number of articles published in the UK news media on trans topics between 2015 and 2022. 154. The average number of articles published every month by the UK media on trans topics over the last 7 years. And this, by the way, excludes LGBT media, being pro-LGBT media. 501. The number of articles published in UK news media on trans topics in May 2022. That's over 16 articles a day. 163. The number of articles published by the Daily Mail on trans topics in May 2022. That's more than 5 per day. The reason why they do this, you know, the reason why Dave Chappelle is super transphobic on the timeline now and in his specials, Ricky Gervais as well, is because it's lucrative. It's making money. It gets the clicks.
Yeah.
Because the
And it
humanity
fires
of
up the
trans
base.
people has been weaponized the world over to great effect in terms of attaining political power, in terms of making money. Well, why wouldn't a bunch of different news publications continue to push stories about trans people bordering on, you know, both sidesing one side, the right wing, wanting to just, you know, eliminate.
Both sizing genocidal language. This is the worst thing that's happening. When people are saying, well, I can see both sides of this. Do these people really deserve rights?
Trans people, and the other side being like, yo, they're completely wrong on everything they say, and it's actually good that trans people get the care they need. Somehow that's presented as like an equal, you know, both sides of the same argument, marketplace of ideas type beat. Or it's just outright transphobic. It's just a lot of money to be made being transphobic on the timeline. But I suppose to end on a more positive note, here is a study from February 25th, 2022, from the JMA Network. Mental health outcomes in transgender and non-binary youths receiving gender-affirming care. So,
well, that would be good news if it weren't for the fact that we have a whole plethora of data. We have many studies. We have metadata. We have tons of evidence of positive outcomes, but the sad news is that right-wingers just do not care. Right-wingers don't care about it. They do not care. They will not care about data.
So
they just
if you've
won't.
watched this channel for any amount of time, you've heard all of this before.
They
but here's
won't
another one.
care.
Key points. Question: is gender-affirming care for transgender and non-binary youths associated with changes in depression, anxiety, and suicidality? So the right wing would say yes, but that it makes those things worse. Turns out, in this study, findings in this prospective cohort of 104 trans and non-binary youths aged 13 to 20 years, receipt of gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and gender-affirming hormones, was associated with 60% lower odds of moderate or severe depression and 73% lower odds of suicidality over a 12-month follow-up. So, if you would like it for children to not suffer as much, if you would be in the interest of protecting children, well, if the youth you're talking about here is trans, turns out that they become less depressed and less suicidal after receiving gender-affirming care.
Well, but the problem is, as always, that they do not care. They do not care about data. They do not care about protecting children. They do not care about children. They never cared about children. They care about their voter base. They care about getting power. They care about getting money. And that's basically it. The children thing is a talking point. They don't care. No matter how many studies we pull up, no matter how much evidence we pull up, they will just call it woke science. They will just call it fake science. They will say that the science has been taken over by the left-wing doctrine or whatever, and they will disregard all of the studies. This is what will happen.
Shockingly, right? It's almost like there's a medical and scientific consensus on this. You know, it's almost like the standards of care are
well,
this
it's
for a
also as if they don't
I don't know.
care
I just be a
about
little
it.
silly here. Meaning, this study found that access to gender-affirming care was associated with mitigation of mental health disparities among trans and non-binary youths over 1 year. Given this population's high rates of adverse mental health outcomes, mostly the product of the fact that their local community, their parents, etc., are incredibly abusive and transphobic to them. These data suggest that access to pharmacological interventions may be associated with improved mental health among trans and non-binary youths over a short period.
Right.
Wow. I'll leave a link in the
Well, what do
description
you
of the
know?
study if you'd like to
What
see
do
yet
you
another
know?
one disproving the narrative on the right wing, because we do that ad nauseum on this channel because it's really easy to do.
Yeah.
Additionally, Aaron in the morn, like I say, will completely
It is
shout out
super
Aaron
easy.
Reed. You should all go follow. Always on the ball with this kind of shit. A W in Utah. Utah sports ban has been enjoined and transgender people can go back to playing sports. That we had the worst year of trans legislation ever. Courts are siding with trans rights. And this is in Utah. Utah's no liberal haven, okay? This comes just after a cis girl was investigated on suspicion of being trans. So there was a story that, I don't know if it was Utah specifically, but there was a story that came out where like some parents or something were mad about the fact that this other child was doing very well in children's sports. So they're like, oh my God, they're probably a boy. Like this is a trans girl. It turns out, no, that's not the case.
Well, what
But
do
these
you know?
fucking pussy ass, living vicariously through their children ass, no hope for their future ass, fucking squandered childhood, peaked in middle school ass parents, who are salty about their kid not performing as well as they would hope in sports, have decided that, oh, it's the trans people. You know?
Yep. And thus, the whole narrative against protecting children gets thrown out the window. The whole narrative of protecting children gets thrown out the window. They do not care. Children get abused in the name of this ridiculous ideology. And when I say ridiculous ideology, I mean anti-trans ideology. Abusing little children because you have to play to your base, because parents are transphobes.
Stub your toe? Trans people. Your wife cheats on you with someone more attractive than you? Trans people. Temperatures are going up across the country? Trans people. It's always trans people somehow, because these people are literally mentally ill, and transphobia is a mental illness. I'll say
that's
it.
right,
I've said this before. I feel like it could be.
And you know what? I will not only agree with it, but I will repeat it as well. Transphobia is definitely a mental illness.
Into the DSM-6. The amount of psychopathy that results from people dabbling in and then going further into transphobic narratives, the amount of reality-bending delusion you have to engage with, and the way that it seems to consume their fucking...
Although it's of course all very deliberate and very calculated. This has to be also taken into consideration that it's all about gaining votes. It's all about gaining power. This is all very calculated behavior on their
lives,
part.
once they've gotten into it, I feel like you could have a very strong case to be made that it is actually, you know, a mental illness and these people need fucking therapy. These people need to be helped. Also, huge news for transgender students in the federal ruling out of Montgomery County, Maryland. A U.S. District Court has ruled that the 14th Amendment does not require schools to disclose transgender students' gender identity to students' parents. Trans youth
very
deserve
good.
agency. So the reason why this would be pretty cringe if it was the case is that it would essentially allow for the parents who are, in this case, like any parent who wants to know if another student is trans is just transphobic. Like they're scared of their child knowing that trans people exist. They've bought into the fake lies about, you know, trans people being dangerous or some shit. So it would allow those parents to know about that, and then it would allow those parents to go to school board meetings or whatever and try to advocate for and further oppress these kids that are just trying to live their life.
That's right.
So, cool that
cool.
U.S.
Very
District Court
nice.
ruled that the 14th Amendment does not require schools to disclose transgender students' gender identity to students' parents.
Very good.
In this ruling out of Montgomery County, Maryland. Very nice.
Very
Making
nice
it harder
indeed.
for these absolute psychopaths to target and oppress trans people and kids.
I would say that's a win, but I would also expect this sort of thing to be the baseline. I would expect this to be obvious, but we should take any win that we can.
Single goddamn day. There are currently several such cases making their way through courts around the country. In Florida and Massachusetts, similar lawsuits have been filed in order to establish some sort of quote-unquote right for parents to automatically be told when their kid is trans. This judge says no. This case is near and dear to my heart, as this is my own district. This is the district my child will grow up in. I know transgender youth in this district, and I know how much teachers care for them. This is such wonderful news.
This
Very
is
good,
wonderful
very nice,
news.
very good, very nice. So there is some hope out there. Things are moving in a positive direction in some ways, and also
There
in
is
negative in
hope.
others.
And
So
the
while
more
this
we
entire
work,
segment has been
the
overwhelming.
more we work, the more we fight for our rights, the more good news we will hear.
Filled with negative bullshit because that's all the Republicans have.
That's
it's also
right.
getting pretty, hopium pilled out there in some other places too. So
Yeah.
I try to end these on a good note because it's a lot of bullshit and I know it's tiring to hear it all the goddamn time. This is also why I sprinkle in different content in my coverage as well, because I don't want it to just be, me bitching about transphobes being dumbasses all the goddamn time.
Fair
so I
enough.
hope you enjoy that as well.
Fair enough.
And yeah, I don't know. Hopefully, these absolute fucking lunatics on the right, get their comeuppance at some point. Surely, in the form of electoral consequence, right? They lose their election. Or go to jail. I mean, like I say,
Hopefully.
the FBI, the communist FBI, is looking into a lot of these people when it comes to January 6th, and a variety of branching paths related to it. And a lot of these people also asked for preemptive pardons that we've talked about today from Donald Trump after January 6th. Who knows? Could be cool. Anyway.
Well, hopefully.
I don't know how to end this.